Why do so many Christians hate Western missionaries?
I have read a number of books on missions, and often find myself and other Western missionaries at the receiving end of countless criticisms. The common view held is of the Western missionaries, who are the superior whites that have now become the minority of Christians in the world, and yet never surrender their power over Christian theology and practice. These judgments stem, we are told, from two major historical white injustices. The first injustice is colonization of foreign nations. As Justo L. Gonzalez lays out in his essential guide to church history, in most of this missionary expansion, the connection between mission and colonialism was clear. Missions were an arm of the colonial powers and vice versa. Further, in most of these missionary endeavors, very little effort was made to value the ancient cultures that were being overrun. The fact is that throughout the 19th century and a good part of the 20th, the colonizing powers sought to justify their enterprise on moral and religious grounds. It was thought that science, technology, and progress in general were the great contribution that the West was to make to the rest of the world. Therefore, it was the white man's burden to take these benefits to the more backward peoples of the world, and even to do this by force, if it were necessary. This historical desire of the West to control the rest has been often associated with the modern-day Western Church, as Song Chan Ra does with the American Church. He writes, American evangelicalism remains enamored with an ecclesiology and a value system that reflects a dated and increasingly irrelevant cultural captivity, and are disconnected from both a global and a local reality. At times, the evangelical church has been indistinguishable from Western white American culture. The phrase, white captivity of the church, is used to remind us that Western culture has been dominated by whites throughout its history. It is also used to help us distinguish the significant role of racism in Western culture and, subsequently, American Christianity. I find it difficult, though, to interpret history the way that it is commonly shared. When it comes to the colonizers and missionaries working hand in hand, I don't find this to be commonplace based on available historical records. Simply sharing a ride on a trading ship does not mean compliance and agreement with government trading policies and ethics. What I find in the retelling of various missionary stories is that the colonialist governments often turned to the missionary for advice and translation help, because the missionary was there to actually engage the culture and know the people in their language, while the governments were likely there to simply make a trade deal. Here are a few examples. Carl, or Charles Gusloff, and Robert Morrison served as interpreter and secretary for the British trade work in China. David Livingstone was key in opening trade and stopping slave trade as the official representative of Britain in Mozambique, along with portions of East and Central Africa. William Carey became a leading scholar of Sanskrit and Bengali at Fort William College, which trained British civil servants in India. Henry Williams translated a treaty in Maori and made the terms clear and understandable to the New Zealand tribal chiefs. Remember Gonzalez's historical judgment that it was thought that science, technology, and progress in general were the great contribution that the West was to make to the rest of the world, and therefore it was the white man's burden to take these benefits to the more backward peoples of the world, even to do so by force if necessary. A more contemporary example that combats this belief is Christian missionary Bruce Olson and his work with the Modelones. The transformation of the tribe was so significant that a former Colombian president saw the scientific solutions to the Modelone problems and found them to be a true development in response to the needs of the community. Another occasion, the Mandarin Chinese official in his sedan chair came with news from the Chinese central government of a new law that outlawed foot binding of women. What did he want? For British missionary Gladys Aylward to bring word of the new law to the people, because every woman in this province has bound feet. Therefore, someone with big feet, unbound feet, must undertake the work of inspection. Obviously, no man can undertake this work. It must be a woman. Unable to find the right woman for the job, the Mandarin official designated Aylward for the position. It's very simple, he said. You will travel from village to village and tell the people of the government's decree. You will assemble the women in the center of the village or in their houses and inspect their feet. If the feet of the infants are bound, you will unbind them. The central government is most anxious to stamp out this reprehensible habit, and you must start your duties at once. So Gladys then went from village to village, liberating women and girls alike from the heinous practice. If Western missionaries were so closely tied to Western colonial powers, Why did West African slaves create a center for Christianity in Sierra Leone following their escape from captivity? Wouldn't slaves happily flee from the colonialist religion as well as the colonial powers? Or was there a distinct difference between the two in the mind of the former slaves? The second major historical injustice that people point to is found in the Christian Crusades. The reason why Muslim nations have no desire to heed the gospel call, it is claimed, is because the West has ruined Christianity for them. During the Crusades, the European Church never gave Muslims a chance to choose Christ, as Andrew Walls writes. Supposing the people refused the invitation to submit to Christ, European Christendom had a long-established institution in crusade. The use of force to extend Christendom or to reclaim lost Christian territory. The territorial nature of European Christian experience encouraged Christians to identify the propagation of the faith with the extension of Christian territory, to increase the number and area of localities that were subject to Christian rule. And what of this whole crusade ordeal that left a bad taste in the mouths of our Middle Eastern Muslim friends? Is the Church fully to blame? As Thomas Madden has pointed out, discussion of the Crusades is commonly limited to the years 1095 to 1291 AD. However, the story of the Crusades begins long before this. Muhammad began his prophecies and preaching in Mecca, a trading city in Arabia. In 622, he moved to nearby Medina and became the city's ruler. There Muhammad inspired more than just a religion. Because the prophet was both a political and religious leader, Islam was at once a faith and a means of government. Commerce, justice, diplomacy, and war were built into the bedrock of the religion. Unlike Christian leaders who tried to reconcile their prestige, power, and wealth with Christ's life of poverty, Muslims had in their founder a model of a worldly and a spiritual leader. Muhammad waged war, first against other Arab towns and then against Mecca. The rapid expansion of Islam was truly remarkable. After Muhammad's death in 632, a series of caliphs or successors waged energetic jihads against neighboring peoples. Within a century, Arab Muslims had conquered Persia, Egypt, and Syria. By the 8th century, Muslim expeditionary forces were crossing the Pyrenees and marching into the heart of Catholic Europe. The Crusade, first and foremost, was a war against Muslims for the defense of the Christian faith and people. So the Muslims were at the game of the Crusades long before the Catholics. And the Crusades were a response to Muslim colonization and militaristic expansion. Maybe Christians should be much more cautious about throwing Western Christian missionaries in the same bag as colonizers, and serve history better by recognizing the stark differences between Christians and colonialism. Not to justify war, but would it not be a fairer assessment of history to consider the Crusades in their historical context? Judgment is railed against the European Crusades, but what about the Byzantine Christians? Does it not say something when the Muslim Ottomans decimated them in 1453 AD, long after the Christian Crusades had ended? One has to still wonder even further. If the Western white man was so terrible, why are there seemingly countless stories of unreached and unengaged peoples having dreams of white men coming with gospel hope, like this one concerning a tribe in Papua New Guinea, where the tribes had never seen a white man before missionaries in the 20th century arrived? For generations, the chiefs taught their tribes a legend about the white people, like ghosts who would come someday. These ghost people would teach eternal talk. They would tell the tribes how to live forever. The Karen in Burma had a song of the elders that went, "The sons of God, the white foreigners, obtained the words of God anciently, and they prayed of the white foreigners that they might come." The Palono tribe in the Philippines had an oral tradition of a white man with a black book that would come one day to reveal truth. A dying Caquint chief had a vision of a white man and sent his family to nearby missionaries. A more recent account is given of American missionary Nick Ripken, when he found himself at a remote airport in a country where people could be hostile to Christianity. There were 5 men who were waiting for his arrival that he did not know. His suspicions were on high alert, and he was seeking a way out of the situation. He said, "I felt that I was well trained in being careful in the midst of danger, so there was no way that I was going to leave with these 5 men. As I dragged my bag toward the small terminal, I was already thinking about how quickly I could catch a flight out. The men followed me. They tugged on my clothes, trying to get me to stop. I tried my best to ignore them. Finally, one of them said in broken English, "Sir, stop. Please stop. We are followers of Jesus." I immediately stopped and turned to listen to what they had to say. The quick summary of their story rang true against my better judgment, but sensing the hand of God on our meeting, I went with my 5 unnamed new friends to a room that they had rented in a nearby town. The 5 shared more details with him. They said, "You may think you know why you have come here, but we would like to tell you, Nick Gripkin, why you are really here." They each had found Jesus in their own countries and fled to this one for better security, where they found one another. 2 months earlier, they explained they had started praying this prayer. "Oh God, we don't know how to do this. We grew up and were trained as Muslims. We know how to be Muslims in a Muslim environment. We even know how to be communists in a Muslim environment. But we do not know how to follow Jesus in a Muslim environment. Please, Lord, send us someone. Send us someone who knows about persecution. Someone who knows what other believers are doing. Someone who can encourage and teach us." At 1:30 this morning, we were here praying when the Holy Spirit told us to go to the airport. The Holy Spirit told us that we were going to go to the first white man who got off the plane. The Holy Spirit told us that he was sending this man to answer our questions. So they said as they smiled at me again, "That is why you are here. Now you can do what God has called you here to do." I believe that greater caution needs to be taken against blaming the Western Christian missionary for colonialism and the expansion of Constantinople-type Christendom, criticizing the prominence of English theological and missiological textbooks, and berating the white man's efforts to reach the lost. Maybe the church should instead work together to build upon the Western missionaries' historical work, not accepting it uncritically, but recognizing that God did work through a white man to bring the gospel, broken as he undoubtedly was and still is today. And he will continue to work through the black, yellow, red, and brown man, broken as they are, and will persist in reaching those that are still lost in utter darkness.